Have you ever paused to consider how much of your energy is drained by trying to explain yourself to those who were never invested in understanding you to begin with? Think about it. How many hours, conversations, or even entire chapters of your life have been spent justifying your dreams, defending your choices, or waiting for someone's approval to chase what your heart already knew was yours? Every moment you spend trying to convince someone of your worth is a moment stolen from actually becoming who you're meant to be. It's time, truly time, to shift your gaze inward because everything transforms the instant you stop looking outside for permission and start showing up for yourself. Real success doesn't emerge from persuasive speeches or from people finally getting you. It begins with doing the work, quietly, consistently, even when no one is watching, and especially when no one is clapping. The truth is, most people don't fail because they lack talent or potential. They fail because they get distracted. They allow the chatter of the world to dominate the clarity of their inner voice. They get caught up in social media illusions, comparing their journey to filtered versions of someone else's. They hesitate when judged, stall when misunderstood, and eventually feel stuck, not due to lack of progress, but because their energy was pulled in 100 directions that didn't serve them. But here's the shift. The moment you strip away the need for explanation, when you cease to seek approval and focus only on what genuinely matters, you become a force no one can deny. You realize success isn't loud. It's born in early mornings, built in silent commitments, and solidified through uncelebrated effort. It lives in those quiet hours when the world is asleep and you choose to rise. Not because you have to, but because you are dedicated to what you're building. You don't need a crowd. You don't need applause. What you need is commitment. What you need is the discipline to keep showing up long after the motivation has faded. When you begin to choose growth over comfort, discipline over distractions, and progress over validation, something changes. Not just around you, but within you. Suddenly, decisions feel clearer. Opportunities seem to find you rather than the other way around. Confidence starts to grow, not from likes or compliments, but from the evidence you've created by following through on your own word. That's where real confidence lives, in action, in proof, in the undeniable record of your own persistence. Why do so many of us feel empty even when life on the surface seems fine? Why do we feel drained despite not facing any major disaster? Because our minds are often hijacked. They aren't focused on what truly matters. Instead, they're spinning in circles over irrelevant opinions, meaningless gossip, or endless comparisons. You wake up and the first thing you reach for is your phone. Before you even hydrate your body, you've given your attention to strangers' opinions, sensational news, and highlight reels. That simple act, so subtle, hands the control of your day over to everything and everyone else. And then we wonder why we feel like life is happening to us instead of being shaped by us. The truth is, most of our energy isn't lost in big, obvious ways. It's leaked quietly from the small things we don't manage. The beginning of true change doesn't require a grand gesture. It starts with a single, deliberate decision to focus inward. Focus is not selfish. It is self-respect in its highest form. It is the refusal to trade future peace for present validation. When you stop chasing after everyone else's approval and start anchoring into your own purpose, you no longer need to explain, react, or perform. People will talk. Let them. Your reaction is no longer necessary because you now understand that every reaction hands over your emotional control to someone else. And you've simply outgrown that exchange. Transformation isn't found in impressing others. It's found in showing up for yourself when no one else does. When you stop seeking praise and begin to operate by the standards you've set for yourself, you become free. Free to fail, free to grow, free to build something authentic without needing a single round of applause. And in that freedom, you unlock your most powerful self, the one who owns their path, every messy step of it, and no longer waits for external encouragement to take the next step. Even the smallest acts, 10 minutes of focused reading, a quiet moment of meditation, a choice to decline a shallow invitation. Those are not small. They are declarations. Each one builds the foundation of a new life built not by the world, but by you. Look around. How many people are truly living up to their potential? Very few, not because they lack dreams, but because they're too busy trying to be accepted by others. They sacrifice their path for their parents' approval, their boss's recognition, or social media validation. Some are haunted by outdated versions of themselves and never give themselves permission to grow. But not you. You are stepping out of that cycle. You are no longer making promises, you're building results. You are not speaking your transformation, you are living it, quietly, consistently, with the belief that if you stay aligned, the world will adjust. A tree doesn't shout that it's growing, it simply stretches toward the light every day, and one day its strength becomes undeniable. That is the power of persistence. The path of focusing on yourself is not without its discomfort. It asks you to confront the truth behind every excuse you've told yourself. I don't have time, I'm not ready, I'm waiting for the right moment. But when you strip those away, you find the truth. It was never about time or readiness. It was about fear. And when you face that fear, you realize it doesn't have the hold over you that you once believed. You don't need others to believe in you first. You just need the courage to begin. Begin imperfectly. Begin quietly. Begin without fanfare. Every temptation you resist, every conscious choice you make, every small step you take, that's how transformation accumulates. Not in waves, but in drops. Focus is not a temporary mood. It is a cultivated habit. It's the steady, repeated act of choosing what aligns over what distracts. It's how you rewrite the structure of your day, not as a string of impulsive reactions, but as a deliberate sequence of meaningful actions. And from that place, confidence stops being a feeling you chase. It becomes something you earn through repetition, through follow-through, through doing what you said you would do even when no one else is watching. When you operate this way, you no longer seek validation. Your results will speak for themselves. Your presence will shift. Your energy will be unmistakably different. And the world, eventually, it will adjust. When you focus inward, you discover something surprising. Your exhaustion never came from hard work. It came from scattered energy. Every unnecessary argument, every misdirected explanation, every emotional reaction to something irrelevant. That's where your energy went. Not productive effort, but pointless depletion. Unless you cut those leaks, you'll keep spinning your wheels and wondering why you're not moving forward. It's not that you're not working, it's that you're working with no clarity. Once you see this, everything changes. You begin to realize that not everything deserves a response. Not every comment requires an answer. Not every conversation is worth your time. That is maturity. That is control. That is strength. Silence isn't passivity, it's power. It's a deliberate choice to guard your energy, to remain grounded, to choose presence over reaction. Protecting your energy doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means being selective. It means being courageous enough to walk away from environments that pollute your spirit, relationships that no longer elevate you, and thought patterns that pull you backward. When you do that consistently, you don't just protect your current self. You create the space for a future self to emerge. A version of you built from clarity, not chaos, from purpose, not pressure. Transformation begins within, not in what you achieve, but in how you think, in what you permit to take up space in your mind. Most of us allow our thoughts to be shaped by default, by headlines, trends, criticism. But you have more control than you think. Your mind is a lens and it magnifies whatever you focus on. Focus on lack, and you'll feel scarcity. Focus on comparison, and you'll feel inferior. But focus on your progress, on the steps you're taking each day, and you'll feel empowered. You'll feel momentum. You'll start to trust yourself again. The brain doesn't distinguish between imagination and reality. It believes what you repeatedly tell it. And when your thoughts shift, your behavior follows. You can rewire your mind through simple, consistent choices. Limit what drains you. Choose what fuels you. Begin each day with a few moments of clarity. What am I grateful for? What am I building today? What small promise will I keep to myself? These may seem like insignificant acts, but when repeated, they become the foundation of inner peace. A fortress, brick by brick. When your mind is no longer a battlefield, it becomes a garden A place where growth isn't forced, it's inevitable. Your external world cannot thrive if your internal world is in disarray. No matter how strong your goals or detailed your plans, if your environment, both mental and physical, is filled with clutter, chaos, or unspoken conflict, progress becomes a struggle. You cannot expect to live with discipline when your surroundings constantly echo procrastination. You cannot build momentum if you're emotionally entangled in relationships that drain you, in conversations that require you to explain your worth, or in rooms where your presence is questioned more than it is appreciated. So much of the resistance you feel each day isn't because you're incapable. It's because your energy is constantly pulled toward managing things that should have been released long ago. Look around the room you spend most of your time in. Examine the conversations you keep entertaining, the sounds you allow into your ears, the people who have unlimited access to your peace. Every single one of these elements plays a role in shaping your thoughts, directing your actions, and determining whether you move forward or remain stagnant. And when you start choosing differently, when you begin removing, cleansing, redefining, your external world begins to mirror the alignment you are creating within. Respect is not something you demand from the world. It's something you teach the world to offer you by how you treat yourself. When you choose to stay in environments that insult your growth, relationships that stifle your spirit, or lifestyles that contradict your highest values, you are quietly sending a message that your boundaries are negotiable, that your time is expendable, that your future can be postponed. But the moment you become willing to lose what no longer serves you is the moment you gain everything that will. Don't cling to a person simply because you fear being misunderstood. Don't continue a lifestyle just because it's familiar. Don't remain in chaos because you've learned to tolerate it. Self-respect is expressed not through speeches or affirmations, but through decisions. Quiet, firm, and clear choices that declare, without saying a word, I matter. And as you do that more consistently, you'll find that the world begins to respond in kind. Opportunities align, relationships evolve, and most of all, your own sense of self becomes unshakable. Not because others validate it, but because you do. The root of your confidence will never come from how many grand achievements you accumulate. It will come from how many small disciplines you master. Each time you choose not to scroll endlessly, not to entertain gossip, not to say yes when your spirit says no, you reinforce your inner foundation. You stop looking outward for motivation and begin to generate it from within. You no longer wake up hoping to feel inspired. You wake up understanding that clarity comes from action, and action is a choice. That is the quiet revolution of personal power. When you stop waiting and begin creating. And in that shift, you discover that every morning holds the potential to be a reset button, a new start, a conscious renewal of your standards and your intentions. Not one built on hype or pressure, but grounded in the quiet understanding that your life, every single day, is a vote cast for the kind of person you are becoming. There is a stage of growth that no one can bypass. The invisible stretch where you are acting in complete solitude. No encouragement, no recognition, no applause, just you, alone with your decisions, alone with your standards, alone with your reflections. It is here in this unseen stretch of discipline that everything about your identity is rewritten. This is the test, the proving ground, not for others, but for yourself. Can you still show up when no one sees you? Can you still uphold your values when no one reminds you? Can you still hold the line when no one is there to reinforce it? If the answer is yes, then you are in the most powerful stage of your transformation. Because when you learn to move without external fuel, your engine becomes limitless. When you stop needing reminders, you become unstoppable. That silent consistency, that integrity in solitude, is the cornerstone of every lasting change. It's the sacred ground where noise fades, ego dissolves, and truth finally emerges. We live in a time where visibility is often mistaken for value, where speaking loudly is equated with confidence, where showing off is confused with substance. But the reality is, those who make the deepest impact are often the ones working quietly in the shadows, moving intentionally without announcing every step, allowing their results, not their rhetoric, to do the talking. You don't need to declare your goals on every platform to be committed to them. You don't need to post your progress for it to be real. You don't need to market your transformation in order to make it meaningful. Because when you live with depth, presence, and integrity, people will feel it. Maybe not at first, maybe not immediately, but over time, your presence will become undeniable. It will speak louder than anything you could say. It will radiate from your eyes, your energy, your calm. You won't need to prove yourself because everything about the way you move will make it clear. You are not who you used to be. Growth, when real, is rarely glamorous. It is raw. It is inconvenient. It is filled with resistance. But what makes it sacred is the fact that you persist anyway, not for claps, not for approval, but because something within you refuses to quit, because you respect the future version of yourself too much to abandon the journey midway. No one else may know how many distractions you said no to, how many nights you stayed disciplined while others indulged, how many moments you were tempted to give up but didn't. But you know, and that knowing, that private ledger of your choices, is what builds real confidence. Confidence not based on appearance or applause, but on proof. Proof that you are dependable. Proof that you keep your word. Proof that you don't betray yourself even when no one is watching. That kind of self-trust cannot be gifted or inherited. It must be built. One decision at a time. Discipline is not about rigidity or punishment. It is about integrity. It is the act of honoring what you said you would do, especially when you no longer feel like doing it. It is showing up not because conditions are ideal, but because you've made a commitment to become someone who follows through. It's saying no, not because you're harsh, but because you're clear. And that clarity, over time, becomes peace. It becomes order. It becomes the silent structure behind every successful life. You no longer rely on willpower alone, because discipline becomes instinct. It becomes embedded into who you are. And from that place, persistence no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment, like you are finally moving with life, not against it. Remember this, there will never be a perfect moment to start. No one is going to hand you the map. No one is coming to save you. The responsibility is, and has always been, yours. That may feel overwhelming, but it is also the greatest liberation. Because if you are the one responsible, then you are also the one with power. Power to reset, power to rebuild, power to choose again. And you can do that today, not in some dramatic overhaul, but in one quiet, focused step. That's all it takes. One new choice, one small act of alignment. And if you do that long enough, it becomes who you are. Not through noise, not through pressure, but through presence. So let go of the need to convince others that you're growing. Let go of the pressure to keep explaining why you're changing. Let go of the urge to be understood. Instead, channel that energy into action, into the unseen, uncelebrated, unfiltered work of becoming. Because the world may question your silence, but it will never be able to ignore your results. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. Let them talk. You just keep building, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. And eventually, when your presence shifts, when your life changes, when everything you envisioned becomes visible, no one will ask for an explanation. Because your transformation will be so evident, it will no longer need one. There comes a defining point in every person's journey when the desire to grow finally outweighs the comfort of staying the same. It is not loud or ceremonial. It does not come with a sign or a perfect moment. It arrives quietly, often in solitude, in a moment where you find yourself alone with your thoughts and the realization that you can no longer live beneath your potential. That moment doesn't ask for permission, nor does it wait for applause. It simply nudges you to begin, not because the world is watching, but because you are. This is where the most profound change happens. Not in the performance of success, but in the private vow you make to no longer betray yourself. When you cross that threshold, the work doesn't get easier, but it becomes clearer. You stop needing permission to act. You stop waiting for the right mood to move. You stop looking outward for motivation because the reasons to keep going are already rooted inside of you. You begin to build not from fear, not from pressure, but from responsibility, an unwavering sense that if you are to become who you were meant to be, it must begin now, and it must begin with you. It's a common illusion to think motivation is something we wait for, a spark that arrives when the stars align, when life feels good, when circumstances are ideal. But the truth is, motivation is rarely what gets us moving. It is action that fuels motivation, not the other way around. You do not need to feel ready to begin. You do not need to feel inspired to stay disciplined. What you need is a decision, a clear, uncompromising decision to move, regardless of how you feel. And from that decision, you build momentum. You show up once, you do the work once, and then again, and again. And what began as effort slowly becomes rhythm. What felt like struggle becomes your standard. Eventually, you don't need reminders. You've built a system of living that is anchored in your values, not your emotions. You don't look for validation because your direction no longer depends on approval. You are not chasing anyone else's pace because you have defined your own. And it is within this structure, one built on consistency, integrity, and quiet repetition, that your true strength is formed. Discipline, when sustained over time, becomes something far greater than mere willpower. It transforms into a way of being, a quiet, internal compass that guides your choices, your focus, your standards. You no longer debate whether you'll do the work. You simply do it, not because you have to, but because you cannot imagine living another way. You see the value in every small act, not because it feels monumental in the moment, but because you understand the compound effect of repeated intention. Reading one page, practicing one skill, protecting your peace for one more day. It may seem insignificant, but these are the very bricks that build the life you say you want. Most people never reach this realization because they're trapped in the illusion that change must feel dramatic. But the deepest transformations happen gradually, imperceptibly, in the silence of your daily choices. And when you begin to live from this understanding, you free yourself from the chaos of extremes. You no longer need to burn yourself out trying to make massive leaps. You just need to keep walking with clarity, one deliberate step at a time. And as you walk, something beautiful begins to unfold. The noise that once distracted you starts to quiet. The opinions that once shook you lose their grip. The comparisons that once triggered insecurity now evoke compassion. Because you see others not as competition, but as fellow travelers. Some ahead, some behind, all figuring it out in their own way. You no longer need to race because you realize life is not a competition, but a creation. Your creation. You stop asking, am I as good as them? And start asking, am I being true to myself? That shift changes everything. You begin to design your days around meaning, not measurement. You define success not by numbers or recognition, but by alignment, how closely your actions match your values. And when that becomes your metric, life feels different, calmer, more honest, more whole. Living this way requires courage, not the loud, heroic kind, but the quiet, steady kind. The courage to say no to what feels easy but leads nowhere. The courage to walk away from paths that once defined you but no longer align. The courage to be misunderstood, to be seen as different, to be questioned and doubted, and still choose to stay grounded in your truth. That is the kind of strength that cannot be faked. It is felt. It radiates from people who no longer need to defend their choices because their life already does. It is the strength of those who are no longer pulled in every direction, but who move with intention and clarity, even if that means walking alone. And yes, it will often mean walking alone. Because most people are not ready for the kind of freedom that comes with full responsibility. They prefer the comfort of conformity, the illusion of safety that comes from doing what others expect. But you, if you've made it this far, are not most people. You are choosing the harder path, the truer path, the one that leads not just to external success, but to internal peace. In a world obsessed with recognition, there is immense power in remaining unseen. When you no longer need to be noticed to feel valuable, you access a different kind of power, one that is deeply rooted in self-respect. You begin to live not to prove, but to express. You don't speak to impress, but to contribute. You don't act to be seen, but to be sincere. And in doing so, you discover the paradox of presence. The less you try to be noticed, the more your energy begins to speak for you. People may not understand you at first. They may even dismiss your quiet focus as passivity or disinterest. But over time, they will see. Because consistency speaks louder than charisma. And when your actions are aligned, your presence becomes undeniable. This quiet presence isn't built overnight. It is the result of invisible labor, of mornings when you got up early despite being tired, of nights when you said no to distractions even when no one would know, of days when you stayed focused while others looked for shortcuts. No one saw those moments, but they mattered. They built you. They shaped your identity not in theory, but in reality. And now you carry that work with you in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you respond. That is the quiet reward of integrity. That is the echo of your discipline. And in time, it becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more depth. It doesn't need louder voices. It needs more grounded ones. It doesn't need faster progress. It needs more intentional progress. And that starts with people who are willing to live differently, to live fully, to live with intention instead of impulse. That's who you're becoming. You no longer chase what's trending. You choose what's timeless. You no longer rush to keep up. You slow down to do it right. You no longer seek to be everything to everyone. You aim to be whole within yourself. And from that wholeness, you give. Not out of lack, but out of overflow. You show up not because you're trying to prove your worth, but because your life is now a reflection of your values, your standards, your truth. You stop fearing rejection because you finally understand that what is not meant for you cannot stay. And what is meant for you will find you, not through force, but through alignment. You trust the timing of your journey, not because it's easy, but because you know you are doing the work. You stop trying to fit molds that never felt like home, and instead begin carving a life that feels honest. Honest in your relationships, in your routines, in your values. There is no longer a gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. That is the definition of peace, not perfection, but integrity. You are finally in harmony with yourself, and with that harmony comes clarity. You begin to see through the noise. You see the cost of trying to impress people who don't even know themselves. You see the emptiness of chasing trends, the futility of living for likes, the hollowness of success that isn't aligned with truth. So you stop. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You become slower to respond, quicker to reflect. You speak less, but say more. You no longer seek to be understood by everyone because you've realized the only understanding that truly matters is the one you cultivate within. And when you stop performing, when you drop the need to be anything other than who you are, you begin to attract people, experiences, and opportunities that are drawn not to your image, but to your authenticity. That is the turning point. That is where life begins to meet you at the level of your inner work. This life, your life, is yours to shape. No one else is coming to design it for you. No one else can walk it for you. But the moment you begin to take ownership of every thought, every habit, every interaction, you stop living by default and start living by design. And that design doesn't need to be flashy. It doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be true. Because when you live true, deeply, quietly, steadily, there is nothing more powerful. You stop asking, am I on the right path? And start asking, am I walking it with integrity today? And if the answer is yes, you keep walking. Not because it's easy, not because you're sure of every step, but because the path is yours. And that is enough.